Alright, time to sit down and write my script to solve the final secrets of the Mimic. There can't be that much to write about. I mean, come on, it's not like Steel Wool added that much to the lore. Let's aim for a quick wrap up in like 30 minutes. Yeah, that sounds about right. Shit. So I might have extremely underestimated the amount of content left for me to parse through, but only by a little bit, I promise. Yet, somehow, despite the odds, I made it. And now it's time to solve some of the most important questions from the recent Steel Wool games. And I will admit, I've been delaying a certain topic for a long time in this series, but now, it's time to face the music. My name is Minibyte Games, and I am very happy to finally present you with the 15 closing mysteries from Secret of the Mimic.
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Overlooking the main property of the manor, Edwin's house will be our first destination for today. This won't be the last time we're back here today, but for now, we'll be skipping the main rooms and traveling right up to Edwin's personal office. Entering the attic, we are welcomed by the sight of a giant freaking hole in the wall. Maybe Edwin liked the wildlife in this area. Regardless, we can also see a tape on one of the walls, awaiting the command to play its recording. Let's have a listen.
Test. Journal entry. Too bad the new power test was a failure. Due to a minor detonation, there is damage to my office interior, as well as a small fire. Note to self, portable cleaner that gets rid of smoke damage. Oh, better yet, a Cleanovac attachment.
Help! M2! Respond! Emergency! Call for help!
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Please! I can't move. I can't feel my legs.
You know, speaking of legs, what do you think? I just finished mine. There are still a few kinks to work out.
I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond.
Oh, I can't right now, buddy. We can do something fun tomorrow. I promise. Ask your mom if she's not busy.
M2, help.
This tape appears to be replaying the aftermath of an altercation between Edwin Murray and M2. M2 was the Mimic program that was taught violence by Edwin, and as a result, attacked Edwin when given the opportunity. An explosive or detonation is also mentioned, explaining that weird hole in the wall. We learn, as M2 mocks its creator, that Edwin seemed to lose sensation in his legs, and M2 was given a working set. However, the tape cuts off before we can hear the end of this confrontation, leaving the conclusion up to interpretation. This ambiguity introduces us to secret number 1. Did Edwin survive the grim encounter with M2 depicted in this tape? When first introduced to this question, the answer may seem simpler than it actually is. The murderous, violent M2 endoskeleton is free to move around, while Edwin is unable to move his legs in the same room. Logic dictates that M2 should easily be able to rip Edwin to shreds, and snap his neck 1,000 times over. And that would make perfect sense to me, if it weren't for the fact that there is no body here, not even in a neighboring room, nor a subtle hint. So what gives? Why leave Edwin's life in such an ambiguous state? Well, it's obviously theory bait. So what sort of evidence could there possibly be outside of this area for Edwin's survival? Well, not much, as all the other tapes and logs Arnold collects regarding Edwin occur before this point in universe. On top of this, the game seems to heavily imply that Edwin is dead by the events of Secret of the Mimic, and it would make sense to reveal that he died in the final tape of the game. First, let's take a look at how F10 and 4 seems to treat Edwin's current state of living. At the very end of the parachute.exe route, right before M2's chase, F10 and 4 makes a final speech while Arnold rides down the elevator. Interestingly, M1 isn't addressing Arnold in this speech. No. Instead, she attempts to communicate with Edwin to fix M2. Her belief in Edwin's survival is further strengthened by one of the final logs we collect, and her speech in the office, where we learn that F10 and 4 sent us to convince Edwin to repair M2. This seems all good, and surely supports the idea that Edwin always comes back, if it weren't for how the game sets up this entire situation with Edwin. You see, the player hears F10 and 4's speech right before riding the Mr. Healthful tram to the Murray household. Edwin's unexplained absence from the manor during the game, and this speech have now set up a mystery in the player's mind of what happened to Edwin when entering the house. Through that previously mentioned mail log, Steel Wool once again brings our attention back to that question right before entering the attic. And guess what is displayed within Edwin's office as soon as we enter? That's right, the audio tape heavily insinuating that Edwin died before the events of Secret of the Mimic. The way this mystery is presented leads me to believe that Steel Wool wants the players to believe that Edwin died in the tape. F10 and 4 has been shut out of the house for so long that she doesn't understand that Edwin's gone. The hope she has doesn't truly exist, and the family will never be brought back together like how M1 imagined. Taking the game's narrative at face value, akin to how much of the story is presented, it only makes sense for Edwin to die at this moment. I would say this is an open and shut case. Edwin is dead, except for the fact that there is no dead body in this entire area. Something just feels off. To me, this reads as Steel Wool leaving his fate uncertain for the future, depending on where the story progresses in new games. They're riding a very fine line here, making it so that the general audience and story ends with a satisfying conclusion to Edwin's story, but deeper lore enthusiasts continue to question whether or not he actually died. However, even the lack of a missing body isn't enough for me to declare that Edwin survived this dire encounter with M2. But before we discuss the entire theory as garbage, we have one more source of Edwin lore to look at: Tales from the Pizzaplex. Now, this is something I've been waiting to address in a Secret of the Mimic video for a while. Tales from the Pizzaplex and I used to be the best of friends. TalesGames was looking more and more likely as Secret of the Mimic got closer and closer to release. Then, the game dropped, and everything was lost. TalesGames was debunked within the first hour of the game, with dates contradicting most events we learn of from the Mimic short story. I was heartbroken. My relationship with Tales from the Pizzaplex had turned sour, and I was done with these stories forever. That is, until today, where I finally get to explain the nuances and aftermath of the Tales debate. You see, while the original TalesGames theory has been 100% debunked, that doesn't mean theorists have to eliminate everything from the stories. Tales fiction argues that F10 and 4, or whoever the new CEO of Fazbear is, creates the Tales from the Pizzaplex stories in-universe, aligning with the storyteller in the books using real elements to make randomly generated stories. While compelling, we have yet to see any FNAF book or other media existing in-universe. And while the Fazbear virtual experience does exist and is a similar situation to Tales fiction, the issue is that the VR game shows the real in-universe events. It isn't mixing up details or changing entire storylines. The only part the experience truly gets wrong is with excluding a couple details, which seems to be due to the lack of in-universe knowledge regarding those details. But hey, it hasn't been debunked yet, so who knows? Another recent interpretation posits that the original Mimic short story is actually from the broken memories of M1, but the other stories are still in the games. The main evidence for this theory comes from a couple notes found in Secret of the Mimic, one in Basement Level 1 with the moon, and the other located in the admin wing. Both of these seem to indicate that someone is having issues with their memory, namely someone with Fiona's memories. Given that these memories seem to originate from Fiona, and the use of the term corrupted file suspected, it is extremely probable that these pages are in reference to either M1 or M2. If you're wondering why M2 would have a connection to Fiona's memories, you can watch my theory explaining moon.exe. Regardless, this means that either M1 or M2 had a corrupted memory file that replaced Fiona dying at Fall Fest with instead Fiona passing away at childbirth. I have a question for you. How did Fiona Murray die in the Tales from the Pizzaplex continuity? The same way that's described in these notes. Fiona died while giving birth to David due to complications. This is clearly described early in the Mimic short story. Now, I wonder why Scott would add a note that's a clear reference to the Tales books when he could have added any other inconsistency to indicate a memory error. A coincidence, perhaps? Oh, no, I forgot. Scott doesn't do coincidences, that's right. Personally, I view this as more of a reference than anything. It seems like a way to further separate the two continuities and introduce the memory errors of M1 or M2. The note brings up an event exclusively from the books and then states that it isn't what actually happened in universe. But hey, who knows what Scott will include in Ruin 2, the Security Breach prequel, or Help Wanted 3. The final interpretation that I've seen circulating around, besides ignoring Tales, is Tales parallels. The idea that these stories give us narrative parallels and ideas that the games will follow. For example, while Secret of the Mimic diverges heavily from the original story, they both involve the Murray family, the creation of a mimic endoskeleton, the violent outburst of Edwin that causes the violent mimic personality, and Fazbear employees being sent in to retrieve the mimic. Using this logic, other stories in Tales, especially those that relate to the Mimic, could also be reimagined into the game's timeline. This theory allows for Tales to still be relevant to the main story of FNAF, while also accepting the reality that they are within separate continuities. But why should you follow this interpretation over any of the other theories regarding the Tales books? Simple. Look no further than a handful of the stories themselves, specifically GGY and the Bobby Dots. Both of these tales have very strong connections to the games, and those connections originally convinced me of Tales games. GGY includes Gregory and the arcade cabinets that originated from Security Breach. Bobby Dots takes place within the exact same pizzaplex that we've seen now in multiple games. These pizzaplex similarities are directly focused on throughout the story, pulling away from the main narrative to show our protagonist working on different attractions from the games. It almost seems like these connections are meant to tell us to compare Tales from the Pizzaplex to the games more directly. Revisiting these two tales, you might be wondering why they help the Tales parallel theory. After all, if they're so close to the games that they might as well be canon, why would they support the idea that these tales are parallel? Well, first of all, these stories cannot literally be in the games. Since it is very unlikely for Secret of the Mimic and the Mimic to exist in the same timeline, and we know that Secret of the Mimic is in the games, probably, that means at least one of the Tales stories isn't in the games. If one of the stories isn't in the games, then why would the others directly happen within the game's continuity? There's no logic given by Secret of the Mimic or the Tales series to let us pick and choose which stories are directly within the games and which are not. So following Secret of the Mimic, we should assume that the rest of the Tales are not in the games, unless stated otherwise. Therefore, the next best thing to explain why GGY and the Bobby Dots are so close to the games is that they are parallels. A character named Gregory hacking into the animatronics? That means Gregory likely had a similar role before Security Breach. A poor developer tricked by Fazbear to make the indie games mentioned in Help Wanted? This furthers our understanding of how FNAF VR and the new Fazbear brand came to be. Now, while these tales are helpful in showing the use of Tales parallels, there is one story that is more important than the others for solving our first two mysteries today. It's finally time to talk about the Storyteller. In this continuation of the Mimic short story, Edwin finds himself working at the Pizzaplex due to a deal made previously, where Fazbear Entertainment bought out his company. When Mr. Burrows, the head of the board, gets everyone else on board about an AI storytelling tree, Edwin vehemently opposes it. He goes to long lengths to learn more about this mysterious AI. Sending Edwin into a state of pure panic, a giant white tiger head is revealed to be the storyteller's chosen avatar. After installation is complete, the storyteller starts causing problems all around the Pizzaplex. Later, Edwin gets inside the tree and discovers that it is running the program Mimic 1. Edwin attempts to shut it off, but is accidentally killed by Mr. Burrows in the baobab tree of the storyteller. After that summary, I hope you can see why this story specifically might be valuable to our two Mimic mysteries. While this story certainly has its differences from the games, there are also obvious parallels to bring to focus. Both timelines contain a program running within a lot of the pizzaplex systems that just so happens to share a connection to the white tiger that was formally introduced in Secret of the Mimic. Sure, this story may be more disconnected than our other examples, but the narrative parallels of this story cannot be ignored. You can even address the different pizzaplex layout in the storyteller thanks to VIP. Serving as the first entry in the interactive novel book series, VIP's canonicity is still in question thanks to the TalesGames Debunk. However, VIP and some Tales stories include details about attractions at the pizzaplex changing over time and reshaping the building layout. Therefore, the unique layout in the storyteller could be included to inform us that this takes place prior to the events of Security Breach, earlier in the pizzaplex's timeline. Using the Tales stories as parallels for what we see in the games is the only way to truly address these direct connections and keep Tales from the pizzaplex out of the game's timeline. But wait a second, if we're running with Tales parallels, then remind me of the main character in the storyteller. That's right, Edwin. In a separate continuity, likely meant to parallel the main continuity, Edwin Murray survives past the Mimic's original story in the factory and goes on to work at the pizzaplex. The Mimic even sets up the same mystery that Secret of the Mimic does. Edwin disappears by the time that the Fazbear technicians enter the facility, and whether he lives or dies is never explained. That is, until the storyteller, where he dies trying to stop a Mimic virus early in the pizzaplex's timeline. If we're meant to take all this information from the Tales books and apply it to our understanding of the games, which is pretty blatant in some stories, then why not also look towards Edwin's narrative in the books? While using information exclusive to the books as a linchpin to a theory is certainly not optimal, we really don't have a lot to go off of regarding Edwin's status post-Secret of the Mimic. For now, I think it is a safe bet to assume that Edwin is alive and will be featured in a future game. However, borrowing more from the storyteller, it also seems likely that Edwin will die in his attempt to stop Glitchtrap/Helpy. I'm calling it now. Edwin will return in a future game. Viewing the window in-game, you may not notice anything initially. But if you squint those eyes of yours and focus on the window to the manager's office, something has changed. The silhouette of a figure now stands there by the window, pacing back and forth over and over. There's no one there when you visit the manager's office in person, nor when you trek on to the warehouse section of the game. So what gives? Who is this mystery man? It's not the Digityper, as the outline doesn't match up, and the same can be said about either one of the Mimic endoskeletons. You could argue that they're wearing a cloak to disguise their figure, but that's a far stretch to make for now. Excluding these candidates, I believe we are left with two good solutions to consider for our mystery person: the spirit of an MCM or Fazbear employee, or Edwin Murray. We see many examples of dead Fazbear technicians sent into the manor that died. Given how it's made pretty apparent in-game that the building is at least haunted by David's spirit, there could certainly be more spirits lurking around the property. However, I want to focus on the much more exciting and likely interpretation: Edwin. Steel Wool making sure to add Edwin in an update would make much more sense if it were there to give us hints for what's to come. He's also the only person's fate left ambiguous before the events of Secret of the Mimic, so having a small hint to his existence would add to the intrigue. Not to mention the fact that using a dark silhouette like this heavily evokes the imagery of Edwin from the hit song Jackie's Box. I'd say it almost seems like an intentional reference that doubles as a lore hint. Going with the Edwin interpretation, our theory is confirmed then, right? We see Edwin alive and well within the MCM walls, so he survived the M2 encounter. And I would agree with you if we didn't see him from a distance cloaked in darkness. There's no guaranteed way to tell if this is Edwin's spirit watching us from afar, or literally Afton doing something else at the manor. However, I will say that we don't get any other hints of specifically Edwin's ghost haunting the manor grounds. It doesn't even really act like the other spirits at MCM, namely the White Tiger. On top of this, why would Edwin's spirit only appear in the manager's office, when that isn't even close to where he actually died? It just doesn't add up to me. It was also recently brought to my attention that this mail log from Secret of the Mimic is very strong evidence for Edwin's survival. This message tells us that F10 and 4 sent Edwin the blueprints for Cradle after M2 is violent in the manor. We also know that someone, likely Edwin, builds the Cradle by the time of Secret of the Mimic. In Edwin's supposed death audio, we hear M2 say that it just finished its legs. That means that whenever F10 sent the blueprints, it was likely after M2 had built the legs for itself, resulting in M1's conclusion that it needs to be contained. If the blueprint cradles are sent after M2 had finished repairing its legs, then Edwin had to survive past the M2 encounter to receive F10 and 4's message and build Cradle. This strengthens my resolve even further. Edwin is not dead. Alright, I'm finally done. Now we can move on to the next mystery on our list. Sticking to the subject of Edwin Murray, another ambiguous part of MCM's history is what specifically Edwin created. A major point of contention after Secret of the Mimic released was just how much technology and characters that Edwin or MCM invented. From the insinuation that Edwin is the father of the Springlocks, to discovering the origins of Foxy and Chica, Secret of the Mimic seems to contradict what we thought about the birthplaces of these inventions. But how much validity do these claims have when examined individually? Did Henry and William make nothing at all? Let's dive right into secret number 3. To begin this analysis, we'll be starting by listing all the inventions we've seen Fazbear adopt that are confirmed to be created by Edwin. This includes attractions like Candy Kidda and Mystic Hippo. Even though we don't see either of them in-game, they both have specific posters put on display around MCM. Given that all the other posters either show off creations from MCM or projects that MCM helped with, it seems like a safe bet to say that these are both inventions of Murray. Since neither of these advertisements have other company names or attachments, both characters should be Murray property. The connections to MCM are even more pronounced for Mystic Hippo, due to the MCM symbol button on the machine in Help Wanted 2, and an unfinished minigame that was supposed to be featured in Secret of the Mimic with the hippo herself. Similar logic applies to characters like Orville the Elephant, Roxy, Montgomery Gator, and Big Top, who is clearly meant to be the origin for the Music Man variants. All of these mascots are present within MCM for sale through either suits, cutouts, or giant mechanical spiders. More interestingly, however, we can also use this same logic to explain Foxy the Pirate. When exploring MCM, you may not pick up on Foxy's inclusion until you find yourself within the theater section of the game. Found on only a handful of posters, and more primarily in his own theater performance, Foxy the Pirate is proudly displayed as another product of MCM. As stated by Edwin at the beginning of your journey into the manor, everything you see within the facility walls is for sale. This would include the theater performance as well as the characters involved, including Kit, Roxy, and first mate Foxy. Foxy being a later addition to the band, namely after Fazbear bought out MCM, would make a lot of sense with what we know about Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. In the original diner, Fredbear's Family Diner, there were only 2 characters present, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, Freddy and Bonnie. When expanding to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, which started as an MCM project, it appears that Fazbear Entertainment wanted to expand the band through the use of external characters. As a result, restaurant patrons were able to watch the amazing performances of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria in 1983. Speaking of Freddy's, if we have solid origins for Freddy, Bonnie, and Foxy, then where the heck did Chica originate from? Luckily for us, Secret of the Mimic has also graciously given us a great answer to this question. Starting early into your adventures, little hints of Murray's work on a project called Chica's Party World are given to the player. This isn't the first time we've heard of the aforementioned establishment, as the source code of multiple sister location teasers first mentioned the name. Unfortunately, it seems that we had to wait almost 9 years to get an explanation for the party world. But hey, better late than never. Further into the Goofy Mimic game, we get even more information on MCM's involvement with the Chica character. M2 emerging from a Chica's party box in a Chica mascot costume, numerous cupcake animatronics scanning the admin wing, and a company titled Chica's Restaurants? Whoa, let's break this down. Based on Chica's Restaurants being a separate company name, it seems unlikely that Murray literally owns any of the characters related to Chica's Party World. This assertion is confirmed in a mail log titled Chica's Party World, where a client is very happy with the Chica designs from Fiona. Actually, this message log is the source for most of the early confusion regarding the ownership of the Chica character. It is stated that Fiona made the character design of Chica, and other people at MCM were making costumes based on that design. Given we see a party box with a Chica mascot costume present at MCM, doesn't it make sense that the Murrays would have some ownership over Chica to be allowed to display it for sale? Thankfully, it's a lot less complicated than I just made it out to be. Context matters, and with that in mind, it is important to consider the audience for Edwin's sentence at the start of the game. This line plays specifically before the welcome show, a flashy display of MCM's work to interest potential buyers. As can be seen by the end of the welcome show program, this would have led directly into the showroom area with Big Top and Jackie. The people on these manor tours would have only had the basic level access. Now, take note of whenever you see Chica mascots or products around MCM. None of them are in areas where guests would be taken for a tour. All are locked in areas that require higher level access, mainly the warehouse and admin wing. Outside of these two sections, almost no mention of Chica is found, except for a single collectible. This leads me to believe that Chica was not for sale at MCM, due to a lack of ownership over the character. Murray was only allowed to commission Chica-related products for Chica's restaurant and their establishments. But what good does this revelation do for us? If we assume that Chica's restaurant isn't a child company of Fazbear Entertainment, then when did Fazbear absorb Chica's restaurants? Well, first of all, we know that Chica was planned to be a part of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria since at least the mid-1970s. This leads us to two separate possibilities. Fazbear already consumed Chica's restaurants by that time, or Chica's restaurants agreed to collaborate with Fazbear Entertainment and MCM. Now you could follow either one of these interpretations, and the timeline would work out just fine. However, it does seem unlikely that Chica's and Fazbear cooperated for Freddy's when their establishment is referred to as the Fazbear Project. No involvement from any other companies or brands. This means that while Fiona made this specific design of Chica, neither Edwin nor MCM created the character of Chica. Henry might have been the one to create Chica if Chica's Restaurants is a subsidiary of Fazbear Entertainment, but it honestly doesn't matter too much if he did or didn't. I'll leave that to people who care more about Chica's origins. Another character Edwin created that was later absorbed by Fazbear Entertainment was Moon, originating with his Sleepy Moon design. While this wasn't a major shock to most, as this was a popular theory before Secret of the Mimic released, it is good to get confirmation on the creation of Moon. And while Sun does appear in moon.exe, it doesn't seem that there was ever a literal Sun mascot or attraction present at MCM. But I feel it is fair to say that Sun's origins also lie with the Murrays. And that leaves us with the invention that has sprouted the biggest debate over ownership: the Springlocks. While not a major focus of the game itself, Arnold climbs into several Springlock suits throughout his journey. Dolly even says that the suit he was in had suffered from a Springlock failure.
Another Springlock failure?
But we clearly aren't in agony from the same pain that Afton felt during his Springlock failure. What could have possibly changed? Well, the logs clear this confusion up very simply. One audio log tells us about Fiona's fear of someone getting injured by the current Springlocks at MCM. These Springlocks sound very similar to the ones we know from the original series, snapping shut after getting exposed to a little bit of liquid. Fiona sent this complaint to Edwin, asking him to make the suit safer for employees to wear. Based on blueprints and another mail log we find in-game, it seems that Edwin was successful in creating a Springlocks Mark II that was immune to water damage. These seem to be the suits worn throughout Arnold's journey, explaining why he didn't get punctured 1,000 times over when the Springlock failure triggered. The game tells us plain and simple that Edwin made an upgraded, safer version of the Springlock that is just never adopted by Fazbear in the future. But this still leaves us with a bigger question. Who made the original Springlocks? Were they sent to Edwin by Fazbear Entertainment for use, or did MCM create the originals as well? Well, let's take a look at the timeline of Fazbear Entertainment and their use of the Springlocks. Ever since Security Breach released, we've been getting these Fredbear's Family Diner posters featuring Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. This is pretty useful. We now have higher quality versions of these characters that have only truly shown up in the FNAF 4 minigames. After all, why would there be other versions of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie? And hey, you can run with that logic for about 10 seconds. Critically analyzing the two sets of designs, it is immediately apparent that there are many differences present between the duos. In FNAF 4, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie appear to be Springlock suits, and have a design more akin to the animatronics from Freddy's. However, these old Fredbear posters show off a more mascot suit design, not dissimilar to something you'd see at Murray's Costume Manor. Focusing on specifically the mascot version of Spring Bonnie, the connections to Glitchtrap's design are pretty apparent. The purple bow tie, the mascot design, the buck teeth, even down to the release timing of these designs in back-to-back Steel Wool games. However, more importantly for our discussion today is another rendition of this same mascot Spring Bonnie. Sanshi, a merch company that makes FNAF plushies, recently released a pretty accurate plush version of Spring Bonnie. This one is very similar to both Glitchtrap and the mascot Spring Bonnie, with the purple bow tie and vest, as well as the unique facial shape. Interestingly, the name chosen for this cute little plushie is Retro Spring Bonnie. Being called retro insinuates it's an older version of Spring Bonnie, and not the one we've seen in most of the games that William often wore. Given that MCM only shows projects that they've worked on, and they're advertising the retro mascot Spring Bonnie and Fredbear, it seems extremely likely that MCM worked with Fazbear Entertainment before the implementation of the Springlocks. Now, while I strongly dislike using FNAF merch for lore discussion or evidence, in this case I believe it can work as supporting evidence to something I'd like to call common sense. We know from Secret of the Mimic that Edwin Murray Sr. had some sort of previous business connection with Fazbear, due to him advising Edwin Jr. to not trust them. It would make sense then for MCM to be involved in both the singing show and the family diner, where they could have helped create the original two mascot costumes of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. This would make the evolution of the Fazbear suits start off with mascot felt suits, move on to Springlock hybrid suits, only to be fully replaced with mechanical animatronics. To me, this timeline and progression just makes more sense than starting with Springlocks, returning to mascots temporarily, and then swapping back to animatronics shortly after at Freddy's. Besides, we know Fredbears had to be using Springlock suits in 1983, based on those FNAF 4 minigames, so there isn't really a good opportunity for these mascot retro suits to be used at a time other than before everything else. Following this logic, it would make more sense for Edwin to be involved in the implementation of Springlock suits into Fazbear suits, if he was working closely with them, which is in fact hinted at by the many references to Fazbear around the manor. I mean, why else would Edwin even concern himself with the Springlocks if it wasn't due to work with Fazbear? We don't see any other companies or contractors interested in the technology. Instead, they still seem to be using either solely animatronics or costumes. But this has yet to answer the question of who actually created the original Springlocks. Fazbear could have easily sent them over for Edwin to reproduce, allowing for Henry to still be the creator of the Springlocks. And while this is certainly still possible, I'm gonna have to pass on this idea. Why? Well, one of the main things we learn about Edwin's character is that he's an inventor.
I'm an inventor. This could be a game changer for me.
Edwin is literally the perfect character to create the Springlocks, having the background, means, and motive to do so. As a contractor of Fazbear Entertainment, Edwin would have likely been commissioned to create a suit that can double as a wearable costume and an animatronic. Even in Edwin's house at the end of the game, you can see the bottom half of an original Springlock model, almost as if he's the one to have originally created them in his house. This would lead right into Fiona's complaint after attempting to implement the Springlocks into MCM's own performances, leading to Edwin creating an upgraded model that never got shared to Fazbear. Why else would Fazbear allow Edwin to show the Springlock designs for sale, unless MCM is the one actually creating these designs? This really clears up the origin of the Springlocks and doesn't require the books to come to this conclusion. There is still a way to connect Henry to the invention of the Springlocks, but we have one quick detour before we get to that theory. Momentarily returning to that original Springlock endoskeleton found in the Murray household, you may notice some interesting details about this particular endo. The surface of the metal appears to be partially covered in dirt or some similar material, and it's missing most of the top half. Looking deeper into this weird dirt texture on top of the metal, the origins of the texture within the game files are actually from a familiar friend, namely that of Nightmare Freddy from FNAF 4. Now, I may be looking too deep into this, but why the heck is Steel Wool using Nightmare Freddy's texture on top of a Springlock endoskeleton? Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make this into a big deal, but Steel Wool could have used or made any non-character texture to emulate Agent Dirt. The choice to specifically use Nightmare Freddy's texture almost feels intentional, especially when you consider that it doesn't even line up with the mesh of the Springlocks and has yet to be changed by the latest patch. The intentionality is even stronger when you consider the placement of this particular endoskeleton, right outside of the vent that leads to David's room. Now, we're not getting into any God David shenanigans quite yet, but it is fascinating that they would choose to add a Nightmare's texture to an endoskeleton right outside of a room reminiscent of FNAF 4. To make this situation even more suspicious, let's turn our attention to the actual description of the nightmares from the final Tales story, Didophobia. In Didophobia, after the gas filling up the fake FNAF 4 house accidentally fails to disperse one night, it is revealed that the nightmares attacking the protagonist each night were actually fake. Instead, they were only the top half of an endoskeleton, with a rough shell over top simulating the characters. With the other FNAF 4 connections I've already discussed regarding this Springlock endoskeleton, Edwin's house, and David's room, is it that much of a stretch to connect the missing top half of the Secret of the Mimic endoskeleton with the sole top half seen in Didophobia? Now, I'm not saying that this is literally the bottom half of the Nightmare Freddy used in the experiments running in 1979. Instead, connecting this to the insinuated idea that Afton took over Edwin's house, we could see Afton used the top half of this endo to create the nightmare animatronics. Maybe the reason we aren't shown the top half is because it would look a little too similar to the nightmare endo design from Help Wanted. This is one of those ideas that should probably wait for a DLC or more evidence before it becomes a strong argument, but it is worth floating around as a solution to this mystery for now. And now, we get to talk about everyone's favorite mystery character that disappears for half of the games. He goes by many names: HRY, Hen, Ski Ulrich, but most know him as Henry, the father of Charlie Emily. Most of what we know about Henry comes from the novel trilogy, and his limited speaking role in FFPS. There's a lot that we still don't know about this character, including his relationship with Fazbear Entertainment in the games. In the build-up to Secret of the Mimic's release, some fans were anticipating information on the knowledge of Fazbear, including Henry's involvement. And for what it's worth, we did get some new information. While the main focus of Secret of the Mimic was certainly on the Murrays, there are a couple mail and audio logs dedicated to Fazbear and someone named Hen. Now, I don't know about you, but Hen sounds an awful lot like a nickname for Henry, almost like they're the same character.
Vanny. It is very similar to Vanessa, and also Bunny.
Thanks for the information, Freddy. These logs indicate that much of Edwin's communication with Fazbear was through Henry, who acted like an intermediary. The relationship presented in Secret of the Mimic led to an interesting divide within the community regarding Henry's status in Fazbear Entertainment. You see, the novel trilogy indicated that William and Henry were co-owners or founders of Fazbear Entertainment, working together since the start of Fredbear's Family Diner. And, obviously, in that trilogy there's no mention of MCM. However, after Secret of the Mimic, some theorists began to argue that Henry started out as an executive working directly for Edwin. Under this interpretation, Henry would be the main one dealing with Fazbear Entertainment for MCM, and would relay any important information or details to Edwin. This idea could even be used to explain the difference in Springlock origins between the novels and games. Henry very well could have also had a hand in designing and producing the Springlocks with Edwin, if Henry worked at the manor. Of course, the main question that arises from this new understanding is how Henry would have gotten an important position at Fazbear later. Luckily, Secret of the Mimic gave us the perfect scenario for Henry to jump ship and land a good position in the Fazbear company. You see, a mail log written by William Afton titled Staff Contracts illustrates an event where someone gave away MCM employee information to Afton. At the end of the message, Afton offers this mysterious person the opportunity to manage a Fazbear location. Why would Scott bother adding the last part of that mail log if it wasn't in some way important or a hint in some way? The first half is clearly meant to connect to the downfall of MCM, and likely leads directly into the audio log where Edwin calls the employees traitors. And hey, he'd be sorta right if many of them were offered new jobs at Fazbear and left MCM. It also seems likely that whoever Afton is talking to is a higher up at MCM, given that they have access to all the employee contact information. I assume Murray isn't trusting anyone lower on the corporate ladder to just have all this information. Alright, so who is a potential higher up at MCM that we know ends up working for Fazbear Entertainment? In my opinion, this role fits really nicely with a character that has been lacking a lot of background. Henry. We know the employees of MCM left for Fazbear, meaning this deal with Afton likely occurred, leading Henry to manage a new Fazbear location. Perhaps the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria opening its doors in 1983. There's no way to really know for sure, but leaving the recipient of this email ambiguous feels intentional. Why not reveal who Afton is talking to, unless it's some part of a larger understanding? The location of this email is also suspicious, right outside of Edwin's office. A likely spot for another higher up or executive to work. And given how Fazbear seems to be one of MCM's main customers, why not leave this executive in charge of maintaining specifically that relationship? This would leave Afton with direct contact to this executive, allowing for Afton to take advantage of MCM's fragile state later and steal all of Edwin's workers. Is this confirmed in the games anywhere? No, certainly not. However, I feel it is implied through these small details, and it would go a long way in explaining Henry's involvement with Fazbear early on in the game's timeline. Instead of relying solely on a non-canon trilogy of books, we can finally use some in-game evidence to solve the origin of Henry. Alright, let's move back into safer territory. The Star Orphans. Yeah, these little guys. What's their deal? In total, we see 4 of them throughout the game. 3 on basement level 2 with White Tiger, and 1 on basement level 1 with Sleepy Moon. So why is there so much importance put on these little stars? They share a dual purpose of emitting a creepy glow and being used as a power source to places with the star receptacles. Now, for a start, it seems pretty clear that this is just another one of Edwin's crazy invention ideas. One collectible from the Storytime showroom is a Starbright nearly identical to the other Starbrights. However, rather than being used as a power source, it appears to be a nightlight used by David. This could explain why the Star Orphans are primarily featured in the White Tiger section. They are connected to David's memories. But instead of focusing on the Star Orphans themselves, I want to focus on how we can use these little stars as answers to previous questions. Take a long look at all the Star Orphans together. Notice anything? 3 of these Starbrights line up perfectly with the plush babies featured in every game since Help Wanted. And I mean perfectly. This cannot be a coincidence when combined with the fact that the colors are kept consistent. What does this mean then? Well, I think this is even more strong evidence indicating that Glitchtrap's origins lie with M2 rather than M1. Think about it. If the Star Orphans are associated with David and not Fiona, and the Star Orphans appear to be somewhat repurposed in Help Wanted, then David must still be here influencing somehow. On top of this, we can explain the plush baby aspect through Afton's involvement, another combination of Afton and M2's memories showing its face. We know Glitchtrap has influence over at least some minigames in Help Wanted, so it only makes sense for the origin of these reoccurring plush babies to be the anomaly. If you want more evidence on this interpretation of Glitchtrap, be sure to check out my last video linked below. Now, I understand there is an odd one out here, that being the 4th Star Orphan. There may be a deeper reason for this, but I cannot seem to find anything to explain the missing orphan well. My best guess currently is that it's a lost memory of David. 3 of the 4 made it to current day, but the 4th was lost somewhere throughout the years. That is just pure speculation on my part though, honestly, and nothing more. Well, that mystery was a lot simpler. Let's keep this train rolling. Have you ever wondered what powers much of the Murray Manor? I mean, excluding the Starbright power sources we just discussed. What else is helping run the facility? Surprisingly, the answer to this question is one of the easiest to find in Secret of the Mimic. All you have to do is go to any pipe rotation puzzle and look at what you're transporting to activate the next mechanism. Or, go to the literal power reactor of the facility right after melting Dolly. This vibrant orange molten metal appears to be the main power source for all the contraptions within the manor. At the start of the Dolly section, Edwin explains to us the concept of recycling, a newfangled concept brought to us by Mr. Murray himself. By taking parts of old, unfixable products made of metal, MCM can make a molten metal energy source. This explains why to access the power reactor in gameplay, we have to deposit these recycling cubes, perfect material to be converted into power in the reactor. However, a deeper question arises from the introduction of this new energy source. How does the molten metal work as a power source? Edwin certainly doesn't explain the mechanics behind the process of getting power from the molten metal. Luckily, this isn't the first time we've seen molten metal used as a power source within the FNAF universe. Yep, that's right, Remnant does in fact exist in the FNAF world, and may in fact be the answer to this mystery metal. You see, Remnant is often used as a source of soul energy. The more Remnant, the stronger the soul is tied to that vessel. This is shown in the 4th closet, where Afton slowly adds more of the MCI Remnant to the fun times, animating the new animatronics. For a more relevant example, look no further than FNAF AR, where more Remnant correlates directly to the strength of your animatronics in-game. Coincidence? I think not. And hey, if the Tales books are meant to hint at what's to come, then this line from the storyteller seems to be a little on the nose.
At its busiest, the pizzaplex was packed with spun-up kids and jovial families, and all the happy screams and shouts and chatter was like an electric circuit that, if it could have been harnessed, probably would have generated enough power to run a dozen pizzaplexes.
This single line sparked the idea that the pizzaplex was secretly running off of Remnant, based on the high energy demand of the pizzaplex and the mass amounts of Remnant from special delivery. I'll be sure to add a link to the Remnantplex theory in the description in case you want to learn more about it after this video. But what if we took this idea over to MCM? After all, in many ways, the Pizzaplex directly copies ideas from MCM on a larger scale. I mean, how else can you explain the molten metal, which matches the description and visuals of Remnant from the books? The scraps of metal used for recycling originate from many different places, so who knows what sort of emotion or soul could be attached to these random scraps. However, I have misled you. This is not Remnant. This is not even related to souls. While an interesting concept to explore, Secret of the Mimic does not expand on these surface level connections in any meaningful way. For a start, let's look back to the Dolly reactor section of the game. All around are containers filled with this molten metal. And do you know why it'd be here? Because there's a literal giant machine that's sole purpose is to melt down the scraps of metal. And that means the visual connections are meaningless, as it wouldn't be the soul energy making the metal hot and orange, but instead the extreme temperature of the reactor itself. We literally see this machine in effect against Dolly, as we knock her down into the reactor, and when she reemerges, her shell isn't doing too well. On top of this, molten metal can work by itself as a power source, negating the use of remnant entirely. According to a little Google search, molten metal has been used as a sort of battery to store electricity so that it can be used later. And if these real-world examples get us pretty close to how we see it used in Secret of the Mimic, then the sci-fi tone of the FNAF universe can carry us the rest of the way. Also, you'd think if all of MCM was running on Remnant, that the entire building would be filled with numerous different spirits. While the building is certainly haunted by David during Arnold's journey, no other spirits seem to be involved in the ghostly activities at the manor. The only part of the Remnant theory that I find compelling is the source of the molten metal, that being from random old broken pieces. However, the safest and most likely answer is the simplest one here. The molten metal itself is the power source, not some spiritual residue. Ever since Jackie was revealed at PAX West 2024, most people have agreed that Jackie has a really cool character design, and Steel Wool knows it. We got to look at this same, cool but overused render of Mimic Jackie for so long, it's probably burned into my brain at this point. And while we're on the subject of our clown friend, Jackie has a weird amount of focus put on her throughout Secret of the Mimic. I mean, besides acting as the poster child for the game to this very day, Jackie is also the only animatronic shell that we don't see after their encounter. She is also specifically tied to Nightmarion. After the main chase with Jackie, you find yourself in a vent, where a remix of My Grandfather's Clock begins to play. Soon after, Jackie intercepts your path, now sporting black tear marks from her eyes and faded black stripes on her arms. You know, I wonder if Steel Wool could have made the connections even more clear. Taking into account these connections, the real question is, why does M2 evoke the imagery of Nightmarion specifically when wearing the Jackie shell? Depending on your interpretation of Nightmarion, the entity shouldn't even really exist at this point in the timeline. So, is it more of a meta clue then? I think so, but there is an argument to be made that Nightmarion may literally be around as an influence, if Afton was responsible for some of the Murray deaths. The connections between Nightmarion and Jackie don't stop there. Nightmarion is a nightmare rendition of the Marionette, an animatronic with even more ties to Jackie. Both are contained within a box and have a crank to wind said box. In fact, Jackie is almost an opposite to the puppet in terms of mechanics, where the box needs to be wound to keep the puppet contained, but winding Jackie's box sets the clown free. We know MCM was involved in designing the animatronics that would be included in the Fazbear project, as Edwin's personal terminal in his house contains a redacted file titled Alt Fazbear Designs. And guess what's right below that on the screen? That's right, a link to redacted alternative designs for the puppet. To me, this indicates that the puppet was likely implemented at the first Freddy's, or at least was planned to be. We are told how important the Fazbear project is to MCM, so why wouldn't Edwin save these files to his personal computer, especially after all the other employees have left? This creates a chicken and the egg situation, where I believe that either Jackie inspired the marionette or vice versa. It doesn't really matter which one is which, but it's something to consider. Otherwise, it's just a major coincidence that MCM worked on both Jackie and the puppet, and they have very similar design aspects. The only answer that makes sense to me regarding the Nightmarion appearance of Jackie is that this moment is supposed to connect all other references of Nightmarion in the Steel Wool games to specifically M2. Nightmarion references follow where M2 goes, including into the virtual world with Glitch Trap. I've also mentioned before that Nightmarion seems to be indicative of agony, which would include the agony within M2 from Edwin's beating. You could even use this as David Vengeful Spirit evidence, as Nightmarion is the shadowy opposite of the puppet. The puppet is focused primarily on helping and protecting spirits, while David, the spirit in M2, could care less about the other children and only wants to focus on tormenting Afton. I'd love to have a more in-universe answer for the Nightmarion appearance shift, and I have an idea I'll touch on later, but for now this is my best answer. Arnold is the in-universe character we follow, who is tasked with finding and downloading the schematics of the Mimic for Fazbear Entertainment. While likely unsuccessful in his original mission, we learn a lot about Edwin's family and MCM through his eyes. And despite all this new information, we never learn a lot about the man we are playing as. What's his story? Is he another puzzle piece to the Mimic story, or just another unfortunate victim of Fazbear Entertainment and M2? Well, as with most things in FNAF, you can take either side of this debate without being entirely wrong. However, I believe Secret of the Mimic has laid out enough clues to conclude that Arnold isn't entirely gone from the story following the parachute ending. You see, a little before Secret of the Mimic released, multiple big YouTubers received packages from Steel Wool in order to promote the upcoming major release. This included new renders from the game, little trinkets, and a message from the Digityper. However, the big final reward from the box opening was a Spring Bonnie bobblehead. This led to many theories about Afton's involvement in the game. After all, Spring Bonnie is Afton's persona. So what else could this be teasing? And then, the game released, and we were all wrong. It turns out this hyped Spring Bonnie teaser was just a car decoration in Arnold's van. It doesn't really hold any significance in the game, and it only briefly appears at the start and end of your playthrough. After the game came out, the Spring Bonnie trinket stuck with me. Why was the bobblehead chosen as the main box teaser right before Secret of the Mimic? And how does it connect to specifically Arnold? The most bare-bones connection that immediately springs to mind is Arnold's position at Fazbear Entertainment. Given Arnold's job as a Fazbear technician, the bobblehead could easily be something he received by working at Fazbear Entertainment. And while this could explain why it's there in general, that idea doesn't tell us why it was chosen to tease Secret of the Mimic. Luckily for all of us, I have the answer right here. And it's simpler than you think. Arnold from Secret of the Mimic is Cassie's grandfather. You see, we know very definitively that Cassie's dad's favorite character is Bonnie. That fact is really driven home by Cassie's description of the AR Bonnie lunchbox from Ruin. And in case you have the memory of a sea Bonnie, Arnold has a Spring Bonnie bobblehead. Spring Bonnie is the original, or an ancestor of Bonnie and Glamrock Bonnie. Connecting Arnold and Cassie's dad in the same way would give weight to this box teaser, and explain better why Cassie's dad is so invested in Fazbear. If his dad died under mysterious conditions while working for Fazbear, then Cassie's dad could easily have motive to investigate later in life. We also know from Help Wanted 2, where we appear to be playing as Cassie's dad, that our player is considered special by multiple animatronics. If Arnold truly is Cassie's grandfather, then Cassie's dad would be special to M2/Glitchtrap due to his connection to Arnold, the original technician to set off the events where M2 gets the data diver. The final two pieces of evidence linking this family together once again come from Help Wanted 2, where we have Mystic Hippo and the references to MCM. Mystic Hippo styled cards appear in Arnold's van at the start of the game, and one of the weird characters in Help Wanted 2 is Mystic Hippo. You even play a minigame with Mystic Hippo that uses the same card design as the one in Secret of the Mimic. Looking at the Help Wanted 2 update, Glitchtrap is showing Cassie's dad hints at Arnold and the Mimic's past, whether intentionally or not. Just like how Cassie's perception was warped over time to accommodate her interests in Ruin, the same could easily happen to Cassie's dad regarding his dad's disappearance in Help Wanted 2. Our next mystery is probably more accurately described as a bunch of tiny confusing elements that left most people stumped. Since I had started writing this script before any big patch had been released for Secret of the Mimic, I was going to say that these little details should be taken with a grain of salt. They could have been simple little mistakes made during development that would be caught in the major upcoming patch. Unfortunately, I don't really have that luxury anymore, because none of these were patched out in the recent update. There is certainly still a chance that Steel Wool removes these small potential issues, however, I will be assuming they're intentional for now. With that said, let's jump straight into the first one of these game-breaking issues, Arnold's form in the records room. At the very start of the game, Arnold is sent a work order form for the MCM job, likely after Dispatch informed him that Arnold would be sent there at the start of the game. This means the only copy of this form should be in Arnold's van, right? Well, after you achieve the admin access, you can enter a room in the main hallway titled Records. At first, the records appear to be pretty normal. However, if you decide to look at the workstation within Records, you'll notice a paper that looks all too familiar. Arnold's work form is within the records room of MCM, when it should really only exist in Arnold's van at the start of the game. So, what the heck does this mean? Well, luckily, the patch actually did give us a solution to this issue: Edwin. If we assume that Edwin is still doing things around MCM in the shadows, then it is possible that he somehow got a copy of the work order form from Fazbear Entertainment. It could have been faxed over accidentally by Fazbear, or Edwin went outside to investigate the new Fazbear van and took the work for him. These are the only two answers that I can give with a satisfying answer for this paper, because I will not be believing in Secret of the Mimic Loop anytime soon. While not a very satisfying answer, I don't believe there's any real way to tie this small mystery to the rest of the larger narrative, outside of it acting as a hint that Edwin is still around. There's not really anything else to add to this little secret, so we're gonna move right on to the second one of these inconsistencies. R&D is home to many confusing sites, especially on a first playthrough when you finally learn about the Fazbear project. However, one of the most confusing, yet fascinating little details in Proto Freddy's is the map presented by Steel Wool. Even a quick glance at the map should cue you into the fact that this is not a representation of the FNAF 1 pizzeria. Most shockingly, this map presents us with the exact layout from Fazbear's Fright. That's right, a building that shouldn't even exist for years to come is directly present in Secret of the Mimic. And once again, Steel Wool decided to keep this frustrating map in the game post-update. What could this possibly mean for the timeline? Does Secret of the Mimic happen way later than 1979? Or is FNAF 3 secretly the Fredbear's origin game we've been waiting for? Luckily, I don't have to make any absurd claims to solve this inclusion of the map diagram. Instead, I have two very simple solutions that don't make a mountain out of a molehill. The first idea is that it was simply a proposed layout for Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, explaining why it would be down there in R&D at all. I mean, when Edwin was originally planning out how Freddy's would look, it is possible that Fazbear sent over an early draft of the layout before it was finalized to the one we see in-game. The second solution is that the map design originates from another Fazbear location. I'm not going to go into why Fredbears may have other franchise locations, but Fazbear Entertainment has a great video going over all the evidence for these other restaurants. If the map really was from a franchise location, then it would completely recontextualize FNAF 3, clarifying that the building chosen for Fazbear's Fright is actually an old Fazbear location reused. There is one slight problem with these ideas, however. You see, the layout of FNAF 3 is designed in such a way to mirror a walk-through horror attraction that it's trying to emulate. Think of the Halloween Horror Nights FNAF attraction from this year. This generally linear layout doesn't work well for a family restaurant setting, with the narrow corridors and a noticeable lack of a central dining room. On the other hand, however, there is no real reason for a Fazbear horror attraction to exist yet, unless they hosted one at Fall Fest, so for now I think one of the other two options is more likely. Our final stop regarding these questionable lore inclusions comes from the last few moments of the good ending in Secret of the Mimic. M2 is reset by Arnold and goes to sleep holding the white tiger, but the ending doesn't fade out immediately. No, instead you are stuck in David's room for just a bit longer before the credits roll. Nothing in the room changes, so why are you here? Well, take a quick listen. What the heck was that? Contrary to what you may or may not be thinking, we've actually heard this sound before. After entering all the bedtime tapes from Edwin's house, this happens. The exact same sound effect. The tapes loading into the system and the vent cover hitting the ground. Out of all three of these tiny details, this is the one that I was most confident would be changed. Why? Well, the timing of this repeat sound effect is inconsistent in-game, and can actually trigger multiple times during this tiger storytime sequence. From an in-universe perspective, why are the tapes randomly updating again? If the vent was opened previously by Arnold, why would it have to be reopened later by whoever is in that vent? But to stay consistent with my previous declaration, I must consider it intentional for now. So what do I think triggered this sound? For a start, we can be pretty certain that someone had to have been in this room for the sound to re-trigger. Since the same sounds were previously tied to the tapes and vent, the insinuation would be that someone else tampered with the tapes and vent. In this ending, Arnold and M2 are accounted for, which heavily limits the number of characters from Secret of the Mimic that this could be. Maybe M1's endoskeleton managed to reactivate, although it is questionable whether the M1 endo exists at all, and we aren't given a reason for how M1's endo would reactivate here. I was pretty stumped and left with a lot of unsatisfactory answers. That is, until Secret of the Mimic got a surprise patch update, and a specific character was seen within the walls of the manor. If this vent sound is tied to anyone, it logically makes the most sense to be Edwin. If Edwin is in the manor doing something, then I assume he'd be interested in Arnold going to fix M2 back into the form of David. Edwin then goes to meet Arnold and help now that the threat is gone. His history and motivation are both tied to M2 and MCM, so why wouldn't he be immediately involved again once his life isn't at danger? From Scott Cawthon's perspective as well, this last vent sound would also link back to the mysterious circumstances of Edwin's death. Ending the game with one final twist that someone else is in the manor would lead to more suspicion over Edwin's death, recontextualizing the parachute ending. While this isn't a very big swing after the Secret of the Mimic update, the idea that Edwin was working in the manor at the same time as Arnold seems to be supported by this final audio segment. I don't see how there could be more to this small mystery, but maybe the DLC will reveal that it's actually Reagent. Later in the game, we are given the meaning behind the abbreviation MXES, Mechanical X-Form Experimental Storage. Even more specifically, the one that runs cradle.exe is storage number 1. Earlier in the game, we are told that experimental storage number 2 also exists somewhere within the property, and that this storage unit contains the Mimic blueprints. Later in the game, we see a machine very reminiscent of the MXES machine seen in Ruin. However, the label spells out F10 and 4 rather than MXES. Looking at all these details as a whole, 2 questions spring to mind. Are there 1 or 2 MXES looking machines? And if so, which machine is the one we see in R&D during the parachute ending? In my opinion, the first of these 2 questions is very simple to answer. Yes. We are told in-game that there are 2 separate experimental storage units at MCM. We also know that MXES is one of these experimental storages. The name difference likely comes from MXES' specific function. It doesn't just store information. Instead, it has the additional function of trying to contain M2 and set up boundaries. I don't think having both labeled as MXES would make sense, as one just seems to contain the Mimic blueprints. Both are storage units, but one is more specific in how it was designed. Its purpose wasn't only storage. I know there are those that disagree, so I am curious to hear why in the comments below. To me, I cannot read the mention of 2 experimental storages as anything other than an indication of 2 MXES-like machines existing. And with that simpler question out of the way, let's move on to the real controversial stuff. Which storage machine is the one housing F10 and 4, as seen in R&D? Well, let's look at what we know about the F10 machine, and compare that to the MXES number 1 machine from Ruin. The F10 and 4 machine contains M1, and along with it the Fiona persona. We know that for a long time, M1 has been kept in R&D, meaning she's been in this machine for quite some time. Whether or not the machine was built for this purpose is currently unknown, but at the very least we know that this machine stores the M1 program by 1979. This means that this storage unit is likely not used often for storage, and is more so used for the M1 program itself, and Fiona along with the program. On the other hand, MXES number 1 from Ruin and the end of Secret of the Mimic solely handles the program cradle.exe, the program created to contain M2. We know this due to the entity's behavior in Ruin, stopping Cassie by any means necessary from releasing the Mimic. And that's not even mentioning the entity's association with the MXES machine in Ruin and Help 1 and 2. Gregory also describes the MXES security system as designed to keep it hidden, the it referring to the Mimic endoskeleton. And this brings us to the first issue if we assume that these entities are in fact the same storage number 1 machine. After activating Cradle, F10 and 4 is unchanged and doesn't display any priority shifts. We hear her activate over the intercoms like she did earlier and continue to pressure Edwin to fix M2. She also never once mentions Cradle when sending you to the Murray house, almost as if it isn't easily accessible or nearby like her machine is. It is by mere coincidence or luck that the Cradle.exe program is right next to where you go searching for Edwin. The Cradle was never your main goal, and yet F10 and 4 makes no comment of Cradle's activation after the fact, almost as if she doesn't know it was activated because Cradle's in another machine. Another detail that contradicts them sharing a machine is, once again, their different labels. It's not like a sticker was slapped over the MXES machine in Ruin to change the title. No, it's indented into the front of the machine. I have a hard time believing that someone else went through the effort to rename F10 and 4 to MXES, because, well, who would really care about keeping the original name from Edwin? It makes much more logical sense if two machines were built, one titled F10 and 4, and the other titled MXES. And if these two entities truly share one body, why even introduce a second one into the story if it really does nothing? We could have gotten the Mimic blueprints from any random terminal containing its files, but instead we're specifically told that they're from another MXES-like machine. After all, the storage unit containing Mimic blueprints could also easily contain the Mimic M1 program, as those are related and would fit under the same storage category. M1 has no issue getting the blueprints, she just needs someone to deliver those blueprints to Edwin so that he can fix M2. Something else worth mentioning regarding these machines is their confusing timeline. We know thanks to this mail log that F10 and 4 is the one to come up with the blueprint for Cradle, mentioning that it is a type of computer bigger than anything else Edwin has built. This means the M1 Endo must be separate from the M2 Endo, since M1 isn't already in a storage unit by the time M2 is violent in the manner. They can't share the same body. Okay, problem solved. Well, except for another mail log detailing an MCM employee down in R&D, who hears Edwin talking to Fiona after the Fall Fest fire. This is obviously meant to be F10 and 4 rather than the real Fiona, but this raises a question. We know that M1 is trapped down in R&D during the events of Secret of the Mimic. We meet the machine face to face that contains the program. However, if the Mimic endoskeleton was the original form of M1, then why is it specifically down in R&D? It seems that by specifically calling out R&D, Scott is trying to connect this to the F10 and 4 machine only found in R&D. But we already know that F10 and 4 predates the creation of both MXES machines, so the origin of fake Fiona cannot be from the machine in R&D, unless the M1 program was always stored on a computer in R&D, and that computer was later upgraded or switched to the experimental storage later. This is mostly speculation, but we do know that the M1 Endo was around the manor quite often, and seemingly before it was reprogrammed into F10 and 4. You'd think that people would start asking questions about where the Mimic endoskeleton went, if it all of a sudden disappeared. Or at least the game would give us some hint that David was temporarily separated from it, as it seems that they spent a lot of time together, even before F10 and 4 was in the picture. As I said, it's not really heavy with evidence, but still something I thought I'd bring up. Back to the main topic, I believe in two MXES machines, one program in each. Glad to get that off my checklist, but the mysteries do not get much easier from here. Right before Secret of the Mimic, a certain theory began to grow popularity quickly within the community. This theory would get expanded upon and edited by many other people due to its customizable nature. The Fazburger. Or fazplot, but Fazburger is funnier, so I'm sticking with the burger. Now, if I were coming up with the Fazburger myself, this section would be very long. Luckily, other theorists have already made great videos on all the evidence for the Fazburger, so I won't be reiterating everything here. To be quite frank, I don't have much to add to the actual idea of Fazburger itself, as I had already believed the basic idea behind the theory, and Secret of the Mimic only reinforced those beliefs. Instead, I'm going to be showing you guys my specific burger of choice and why I've chosen my personal ingredients. And afterwards, we'll look a bit at the implications of said burger. Starting with our oh so massive burger buns, we have the pizzaplex, home to all the other ingredients that I will be including. The buns look a little lonely right now though, so let's add some meat in the form of the pizza place. We've seen the FFPS location multiple times in the Roxy Raceway sinkhole, so I hope this isn't a shock to you. Something that is a bit more controversial is that I get my burger with 3 patties. What I mean to say is that the pizza place isn't just the pizza place. No. You see, I believe that the pizza place was also the location of Fredbears as seen in FNAF 4, as well as the new and improved Freddy's from FNAF 2. Starting with what I believe to be the more common interpretation, Fredbear's Family Diner being the same location as FFPS would explain all the weirdness with Fredbears in Security Breach and Ruin. There are posters scattered all around the pizzaplex using what looks to be retro versions of Spring Bonnie and Fredbear. And below FFPS, Cassie can find a cutout of a 70s Fredbear or Freddy character, which wouldn't really be there unless a Fredbear's or older location was nearby. We don't see this cutout at MCM in Secret of the Mimic, so it must have originated from another old location. It also makes a lot of sense for Fazbear to take advantage of the MCM land after the fire burned down most of the manor. If you decide to focus on a specific minigame titled Fredbear's Nom Nom Bits, you may notice a familiar face on the side of the arcade machine.
Yes, it is I, Minibyte Games.
Weird. Anyway, if you look at the main arcade screen, you'll notice an interesting image of a bear and bunny spirit released from a burning building. The duo of only a bear and bunny has always been connected to Fredbear's, as no other location only features these two animals. But we never hear about Fredbear's burning in any of the games, so which burnt location could have been originally Fredbear's? That's right, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place. Thematically, ending the series at the original location would also make a lot of sense. Everything burns in the same place where everything began, and the little cherry on top? Both the pizza place and Fredbear's entrance have the same double doors. Okay, but if all that's true, how can I argue that Henry also reused the FNAF 2 location? Well, this mostly comes from the connections between Fredbear's and the FNAF 2 location. On night 5, Phone Guy mentions that
we're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that.
While this can be interpreted as a separate restaurant from the one you're currently at, it could also be referring to the original owner of this restaurant. That would insinuate that this is the same building as Fredbear's Family Diner, making the owner of Fredbear's the original restaurant owner. The second movie even seems to kinda back this up, but it replaces the Fredbear's origin with the FNAF 2 location being the original Freddy's. However, I'm honestly not very compelled by either one of those evidence pieces. They're both pretty circumstantial and can be interpreted in different ways that still 100% work. Something else convinced me, and for that, we're gonna have to first look at sister location. Another part of this burger is the yummy, delicious cheese, aka Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental. To me, this is one of the strongest parts of the Fazburger, and the theory wouldn't be the same without it. Secret of the Mimic practically tells us that William Afton and his family moved into Edwin's house soon after they bought out MCM. This mail log shows Afton confirming that he'd never move into the house. And we all know what a double-faced manipulator Afton truly is. That log, plus physical connections between the two houses, seals the deal. Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental appears to be below the Afton house, when Michael goes down there every night in sister location. This would line up perfectly with Secret of the Mimic, where there is an entire underground complex below the Murray house, ready to be utilized for animatronics and experiments. It was also an interesting addition to Tales from the Pizzaplex to focus on a story about sister location connecting to the nightmare experiments in an underground area. A story in the Pizzaplex book series has no mention of the Pizzaplex or any Fazbear location by name. I wonder why it would be included. Help 1 and 2 also has a whole section of minigames dedicated to the sister location area, almost as if the Pizza Place and Pizzaplex are directly connected to Seabear. Even the custom night area of sister location is nearly the same layout as FNAF 1, and guess what we see below the Murray house in Secret of the Mimic? In Ruin, we also see a scooper similar to MCM's claw mechanism and the scooper from sister location. The room is also reminiscent of the scooping room with the windows. If we assume that Seabear is a part of the Fazburger, then the FNAF 2 location inclusion makes a lot more sense. For a start, let's take a look at Ennard's minigame in hard mode from Help Wanted. While there are a mix of references in this room, the main focus is put on FNAF 2. If FNAF 2 is connected to Seabear's, and Seabear's is below the Pizzaplex, then FNAF 2 should also be in close proximity to the Pizzaplex. If you think that the FNAF 2 location is Junior's from Midnight Motorist, then the close proximity to the Afton house is also good evidence to suggest that FNAF 2 might have originally been Fredbear's. I will admit that this is one of the weaker parts of my Fazburger, and I'm honestly ready to drop it whenever something contradicts it, but for now, FNAF 2 stays. And finally, we need to add the pickles to this burger. And now I realize this burger does not look very complete, but oh well. I've previously explained on the channel why I believe that MCM is in some way below the pizzaplex and pizza place. This is likely a result of Afton taking over Edwin's house and sister location moving into the lower areas of MCM. This, combined with the damaged state of MCM from the fire ending, means that all the MCM equipment could have been moved to one of the lower basements to make room for Fall Fest and or Fredbears, explaining why we see similar interior structures and MCM costumes in the deepest depths of the sinkhole. We also last learned in Secret of the Mimic that both of the MXES machines are at MCM, so the fact that we find one in the sinkhole means that parts of MCM must be below FFPS. While MXES was apparently moved at some point, we don't have the context for this moment yet, so we have no real way to figure out where and why MXES is being transported here. And there you have my current interpretation of the Fazburger. It likely isn't perfect, but the locations with better evidence certainly seem to be slam dunk theories. So now let's quickly run through what the implications are under this Fazburger. For a start, M2 being trapped down there for a long time could mean that it was in some way a part of the FNAF 6 fire, which would line up with this drawing of Helpy escaping a burning building. The avatar of the Mimic escaped the FNAF 6 fire. This would also mean that we could be exploring parts of MCM and Seabear in a ruined sequel. If we pick up soon after Cassie's elevator fall, then Cassie could be lost below FFPS, with only a Vanny mask and a Mimic Endo roaming nearby. F10 and 4 could also be stored in these lower levels, depending on what character you believe F10 and 4 becomes. Either that, or Cassie is already under M2's control through Helpy. Thanks to Ruin, we know that Gregory is also somewhere in the sinkhole doing something, as his backpack is found near the Mimic costume room, and he uses the words "trapped down here" in the ending. Here indicates that Gregory is nearby in the same area as Cassie and the Mimic. A future game could expand on Gregory's plans for below the pizzaplex, showing us more of the underground system. Alright, 3 more topics to go. Home stretch, I can do this. Secret of the Mimic left us on a cliffhanger that would be tough to follow up on in a pizzaplex era game. We know that the Mimic was trapped down below for a very long time, likely meaning well before the pizzaplex. However, at the end of Secret of the Mimic, the Endo is out of the manor in possession of the Data Diver, and doesn't seem to be locking itself away in the basement. I wonder why. So, how do we get from a free-roaming Mimic to the one we see in Ruin and Security Breach? Simple. I think a continuation after Secret of the Mimic would fit right in, likely as a DLC. I think the best setting for a Secret of the Mimic DLC is Fall Fest, and Fredbears, but mostly Fall Fest. We've been getting inklings and snapshots of Fall Fest for so long. I think it's about time we finally get to explore a real Fall Fest. It would also make sense for a Fall Fest to be held at or near the manor, since Fazbear just acquired Murray's land, and it could be used to promote their soon-to-open Fredbear's location. M2 could also be realistically around, since the last time we saw it, the Endo had walked off into the forest around MCM. It could still very likely be around the same property. Maybe M2 tried returning home, only to find everything burned and ruined. I also think we'll have to face off against Jackie again in a form very similar to Nightmarion. Not only would it explain why Nightmarion reappears again as a character in the modern era, but it would also give Jackie a proper conclusion instead of the MIA status after her chase in Secret of the Mimic. If I had to pinpoint a date for this supposed Fall Fest DLC, it would almost certainly take place in the fall of 1983. Why? Well, Secret of the Mimic set up a lot of connections between David Murray and the crying child from FNAF 4, with no explanation given. Setting a game right around the bite could give us an opportunity to get messages or audio logs where we learn more about why these David connections exist at all. While I doubt we'll get very clear answers, I definitely think a Fall Fest DLC would expand on these two characters. The DLC would almost certainly end with many pieces set up for help wanted in future games, with Mimic circuit boards in Fazbear's possession ready to be scanned in, and the Mimic endoskeleton trapped with the remains of MCM. I can't imagine the DLC leading us farther away from where we should find everything according to help wanted. Secret of the Mimic already subverted our expectations in that regard. I'm hopeful that eventually we'll get clarification on how these two parts of the timeline connect. And finally, a Fall Fest in 1983 would be the perfect opportunity to learn more about the mystery behind Fiona's death. After all, 1983 does fall on the 10-year anniversary of 1973, the supposed death year of Fiona. Was the Fall Fest fire intentional? If so, who caused it and why? Was Edwin somehow behind it? Or was it Afton taking early actions to sabotage MCM? Speaking of which, let's move on to the second to last mystery of Secret of the Mimic. It is well known that the Murray family is unfortunately split apart very early in the timeline, with Fiona's death in 1973 and David's death likely occurring in 1975. Edwin is quickly left alone with the MCM company and the M1 endoskeleton. Both family members appear to die in accidents, specifically due to a Fall Fest fire and a car shipment accident respectively. However, what if it wasn't as clear-cut as that? What if there are small hints throughout Secret of the Mimic and other Steel Wool games that their deaths weren't just mere accidents? What if William Afton was responsible for both of the Murray deaths? Now that may sound like a preposterous claim to make when neither one of their deaths are directly connected to Afton in any of the Secret of the Mimic material. But these small details add up to a potentially bigger story involving our favorite yellow bunny man. Also, a quick thanks to Fazbear Entertainment for helping me with this section through our discussions on Secret of the Mimic. To start, I want to clarify that it is in no way beneath or against Afton's character to murder people in order to sabotage someone else's company for his gain. In the novel trilogy, Afton is shown to be very jealous of Henry's success and prowess with animatronics. This motivation can be easily transferred over to Edwin, who shares a lot of similarities to Henry from the books, leading to Afton's secret distaste for Edwin. Afton could have also seen an opportunity for personal gain by taking over MCM. I would wager that he would be willing to take extreme measures to get whatever he wants. Once again, the novel trilogy and certain voice lines from Sister Location and FFPS characterize Afton as manipulative and self-centered, especially in relation to his daughter, Elizabeth. Oh, and he also had no remorse or issues with killing children to further some goal, whether that be personal desire or remnant experiment. So there's that too. To me, this is enough to argue that William would have definitely had the motive to sabotage Edwin through murdering his family. And with that out of the way, let's jump right into the evidence. Focusing specifically on Fiona first, we know that Fiona died at a Fall Fest fire. This comes from a recording where Fiona's last ominous message mentions her going to Fall Fest for a couple days. Moon.exe doubles down on this idea, where the statue of the bride from the married couple is burned, with the married couple easily being a representation of Edwin and Fiona. Edwin is heard later mourning her death, and states that she wasn't supposed to be there. The weird wording could be used to implicate Edwin in a plan to burn Fall Fest down, thus explaining why she shouldn't have been there. While certainly possible, it doesn't necessarily affect this theory, since Afton still could have lured her there to be killed in the fire, or even trapped her somewhere when the fire started. FNAF games have actually been associating Fall Fest with a fire for a little bit now, especially in Help Wanted 2. Both the carousel level and Phaser Blast are located at Fall Fest in the AR experience, and both end up in flames. So, can we learn anything about Fiona's death from these minigames? Well, yes we can, specifically from the Phaser Blast minigames. In the FNAF 2 focused Phaser Blast level, if you had previously hit all the rockets in the previous levels, then a chain of events will lead to the entire attraction catching fire. Before getting into the fire itself, the Phaser Blast rocket that is essential to the fire actually reappears multiple times in Secret of the Mimic. That's right, it has been revealed that this rocket originated from MCM, more likely a toy for David. This further connects the Murrays to the Phaser Blast minigames. After the fire from the FNAF 2 Phaser Blast level, you unlock the supposed FNAF 3 Phaser Blast level. However, unlike the others, the place is burned down, and the actual game of Phaser Blast is not the focus. Instead, you are in a 1v1 against a Springtrap cutout, with the plush babies around for good measure. Honestly, using this minigame, you could possibly argue Fiona Vengeful Spirit, due to your position as a victim of the Fall Fest fire who stays around afterwards to attack and kill Springtrap. But the part I'm more interested in for this minigame is the appearance of Springtrap, the marketable version of Afton present at the burnt rendition of Fall Fest. We're only aware of one Fall Fest fire so far, and making Afton appear separate from the Fazerblast game, but still at Fall Fest is an interesting choice. Based on what we know about Fazbear Entertainment, it also makes logical sense for Afton to be present at Fall Fest. Curse of Dreadbear and Help Wanted 2 show us many different Fazbear themed attractions at Fall Fest early in the timeline. With a 1970 poster for Fall Fest present in the FNAF 6 location, and the location of Fredbear's Family Diner, I think it is fair to reason that Fazbear would have been involved in the Fall Fest of 1973, the year Fiona died. And while the Fazerblast fire is presented as an accident in the minigame itself, the order of events that leads to the fire is suspiciously set up. I mean, you literally have to perform certain actions to cause the fire. It wasn't something that happened by accident. Someone had to set it up. If Fiona was killed in a Fall Fest fire, it would also give more context as to why Jacko Chica appears in Ultimate Custom Night. The Jacko animatronics are associated with Fall Fest thanks to their appearance in the many Curse of Dreadbear levels. With all the FNAF 4 connections already present between David and the Crying Child, if Fiona was represented by a burning Chica, a character she created a design for, it would make a lot of sense. And finally, as pointed out by Fazbear Entertainment on Twitter, a suspiciously purple snake lurks behind Mrs. Helpful in the welcome show. I wonder if we know of a deceitful, evil, purple person in the series that could have been involved in Fiona's death. I used to be much more skeptical of Afton's involvement in Fiona's death, but all these details, including a working motive and means, have convinced me otherwise for now. And now we get to move on to David Murray, the unfortunate victim of a car accident. The evidence for Afton's involvement mainly comes from one small detail shared between a lot of the Steelwool games: birthday cake. But not just any birthday cake, no. I want to focus on specifically this circular cake that first appeared in Help Wanted. Despite its debut appearance in that game, there's really nothing to note about its inclusion. The only role it serves is as build-up for Glitchtrap's Pizza Party reveal. But it is worth noting that it may be tied to Glitchtrap for reasons we'll see later. Where things begin to get interesting, however, is in Help Wanted 2, where the round cake reappears in the AR space. I'm sure you're all well aware of the 6 memory dolls that you need to collect in order to unlock the Princess Quest 4 ending. However, a detail less known about these dolls is that you have the ability to recollect them. The alternative paths aren't blocked off after one use, and the game doesn't try to stop you in any way. Wait, what? Why did Glitchtrap just give me a slice of cake, and where is my Freddy doll? Glitchtrap, you will pay for this. But seriously, it is really curious that Glitchtrap doesn't just re-offer the same memory dolls, but instead replaces them each with a slice of cake. So why did Scott or Steelwool feel the need to add back the same cake? Maybe just a reference to Glitchtrap with Pizza Party? That's what I believed for a while, until a little bit after Secret of the Mimic dropped. In Secret of the Mimic, you have the opportunity to find a code and enter the conference room where David's 5th birthday would have been held, if it wasn't for his accident. The room is still decorated almost exactly as we see it in the final birthday tape at the end of the game. Look, it even has the uncut cake that Fiona made for the birthday party. That means, obviously, that none of the plates around the table have any cake slice. What are you doing here? This cake slice has to mean something, based on this one appearance, and I'm not over-exaggerating. The actual rectangular birthday cake is left uncut, while one slice is on the table that doesn't even match the shape. It's 100% intentional. As I've shown before, this slice is associated with Glitchtrap, the mixture of Afton's Agony and M2. Does the association with this cake slice come from David then? Well, I'd say probably not. David died before he ever made it to the party, so he likely wouldn't have even seen the cake slice. While he maybe could have seen it post-death as a ghost or through the M2 endo, that's a bit too speculative for me, and it doesn't explain why the slice is there in the first place. However, the other half of Glitchtrap, Afton, could have been at the party, and therefore would be connected to the slice. MCM works closely with Fazbear, so Afton might have asked to join, or maybe Edwin simply invited him. If Afton was there and did in fact kill David, then it would thematically connect David's death to the recreation of the MCI in Help Wanted. The cake is representative of Afton's victims, and David's party has the mark of a victim. On top of this, David dying outside in some way related to a car would also connect to Charlie dying outside near a car, likely Afton's car as he was driving by. The similarities between David and Charlie's death, as well as their possible possession, is one way to explain the Nightmarion connections. Symbolically, they're linked. Returning back to David's birthday room, there's also a Fall Fest voucher at the table. Given David's mom died at Fall Fest like 2 years ago, it feels like a cruel, twisted gift that can only come from someone like Afton. Overall, this cake slice just makes no sense in the environment if Afton isn't involved at the party in some way. And just like that, we've finally made it. The final secret of the Mimic, ready to be revealed. And don't worry, I saved the best and most confusing for last. It's finally time to talk about the David, Crying Child, and Gregory connections, as well as God David. I believe in God David. Simple as that. I do not need to go into long detail about the evidence and reasoning behind God David, as 2 other amazing theorists have already done so. Their videos will be linked below so you can learn more about their interpretations after this one. To give you guys a quick explanation, God David is the idea that the Crying Child and Gregory were both influenced in some way to recreate David. I definitely agree with this interpretation, since I think it best solves all the connections present between the 3 young boys. However, I believe that Glitch Trap contains the M2 program, not M1. How can I circumvent the issue then of M2 seemingly having no interest in mimicking David? F10 and 4 is the one characterized as constantly wanting to bring David back in one form or another, so why not her? Well, first of all, I believe that part of M2, specifically the sun side, could influence M2 into making another David, especially since it showed interest in returning to David in the good ending of Secret of the Mimic. Besides, M2 started out as a copy of M1, and based on moon.exe, it might have internalized M1's desire to bring David back no matter the cost. While that was overtaken later by the violence of Edwin, that desire for David still exists in some way within the M2 program. In my opinion, this angle makes even more sense when you consider how Gregory seems to be infected. Based on our knowledge of the Glitch Trap virus and the story GGY, Gregory was infected with the same anomalous virus that Vanessa had. If Glitch Trap contained the program of Mimic 1, then Gregory wouldn't even have the Spirit of David, or the Mimicking David code from M2. Gregory is being controlled by Glitch Trap. And if that's M1, there's no easy way to explain why he'd align closer to David's character. Unless you want to argue that Glitch Trap later infected Gregory with the M2 program specifically that he could mimic David, Glitch M1 doesn't seem to work well with God David. I won't stop you if you prefer Glitch M1, but needing a second program feels like an unnecessary addition when compared to the M2 explanation. That's my simple modification to the God David theory for Gregory. But what about my beliefs on the Crying Child? As I've mentioned so many times at this point, Afton likely moved into Edwin's house. A likely result of this is that Afton would have learned a lot about the weird happenings at MCM, David's ghost, the Mimic, and other supernatural elements. I think it's perfectly in character for Afton, with some knowledge of F10 and 4 in Edwin's records, to conduct an experiment on his child. An experiment designed to align his life with that of David as much as possible. Afton has sort of a fascination with spirits in the afterlife, mostly backed up by the novel trilogy, and thus could have wanted to try and recreate the events that made David into the White Tiger. Of course, this wouldn't be perfect, especially with Michael tormenting his younger brother and possible MCI-83 happenings, but I see it as the best explanation for how the Crying Child is related to David. You could argue, if M2 is nearby Fredbear's and or the Afton house, that David's ghost could have changed Cece's character to match his own. I admit that could also work as a direction. Regardless of how exactly it works though, these connections do exist, and in my opinion likely mean God David. I know this section seems short for the final secret, but others have already gone into way more depth on God David than I ever could. I don't want to tread too much on previously established theories, except for when necessary, so there's no need to bloat this section with just evidence for God David existing. All I know for now is that the abyss is calling to us all, and we must answer soon. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm done with my Secret of the Mimic series. Well, mostly. I still have the combined video to make, where everything will be cleaned up and new content will be added, but most of my theorizing towards Secret of the Mimic is totally finished. After that big Secret of the Mimic video and timeline releases, expect to see some more variety in the type of theories I make. I want to eventually build up to a fully fledged timeline for the channel, but I have a lot of ground to cover before that's happening. I may also be live streaming some more coming up, so look out for that in the coming weeks. And with all that said, this is gonna be Mini Byte Games heading out. See you guys next time!